Lin Zixuan sat in the last row of the classroom by the window, holding his elbows against the desktop, staring at the classmates playing balls at the exercise venue outside the window, and his brain was a little empty. Today is the first day of his second year in high school. Qingyun College's campus is full of fresh air, but he has inexplicably felt a sense of indescribable depression. Maybe it is because the history of this school is too long, and it always makes people feel that there is a sense of Chen smell in the air. Qingyun College was built during its Japanese administration. I heard that it was a military base before, and it was converted into a school after the war. With this background, it is difficult for people to think of some bad news. Hey, Zixuan, what are you stupid? A chubby hand patted his shoulder. Zhang Weihao's round face was filled with a smile, and he was holding a newly opened lollipop in his mouth. I was so depressed on the first day of my new school. Why did I get caught by the teacher when I didn't finish my summer work? Go to you. Zixuan rolled her eyes and pushed Zhang Weihao's face too close. I just think this school is a bit weird. Don't you think it's? Every time I start, I always feel disagreeable. Zhang Weihao smiled and sat in the empty seat next to him, saying in a low voice, "You guy, don't really say that there are a lot of strange conversations at Qingyun Academy. I also heard a few days ago that someone heard crying in the middle of the night in the old school building, and the books in the library would flip through the pages themselves. Do you want to go to the tent tonight? Explore? Explore your head." Zixuan curled his lips. Although he refused, he was actually a little curious. He has always been quite interested in these campus legends. Although he does not believe in ghosts and gods, he always thinks that there may be some truth behind these stories. After all, the atmosphere in this school is indeed extraordinary, especially in autumn. There are always some strange things that are unclear. As he was speaking, the front door of the classroom was pushed open, and a delicate cold wind inexplicably scraped in, making Zixuan unable to help but hit a cold man. He looked up and saw that the head teacher Lao Wang walked in, followed by a girl. The girl was wearing a white dress, long hair shawl, and her skin was a bit unnatural, like a person who walked out of the old movie. She lowered her head, her pace was very light, and she almost made no sound. "Classmates, this is the new student in our class, Bai Xiaoqing." Everyone applauded and welcomed. Lao Wang clapped his hands, with a little perfunctory voice in his voice. He pointed to the empty seat next to Zixu. "Xiaoqing, just sit next to the woods. Others are old, please ask him if you have any questions." Zixuan was stunned for a moment, not expecting that he would be named. He subconsciously glanced at the empty space beside him, feeling a little reluctant. It's not that he doesn't like his new classmates, but the first impression this girl gave him was a bit weird, especially the inexplicable coldness when she came in, which made him feel uncomfortable. Bai Xiaoqing walked to the seat and raised her head before Zixuan saw her face clearly. Her eyes were big, and her pupils seemed to be covered with a fog. She smiled warmly and felt a sense of indescribable distantness. She said lightly, "Hello, I'm Bai Xiaoqing." The sound was very light, as if it was transmitted from a very far place. "Ah, hello, I'm Lin Zixuan." He smiled reluctantly, feeling that his reaction was a bit awkward. But what was even more embarrassing was that he found that after Bai Xiaoqing sat down, the air around him seemed to have become a little colder. He secretly glanced at the window. It was obviously not open, so where was it? Zhang Weihao sat behind him, stumbled into his head and muttered, "This new student is a bit strange. He dressed like a lady in the country, and his skin was as white as paper. You said, she wouldn't be, that one, right?" "Which?" Zixuan turned around and glared at him. Although he knew that this guy was talking nonsense again, he still felt a little furious in his heart. You understand." Zhang Weihao bowed and made a ghost face, then quickly shrank back to pretend to read the book. The sun snatched his head and ignored this guy's beating. He turned around and wanted to tell Bai Xiaoqing something to relieve the atmosphere, but when he looked at the past, he found that she was looking down at the course book, her long hair covering half of her face, as if she had no intention of communicating with anyone at all. He had no choice but to do something, and took out his notebook and pretended to be busy. The first class was mathematics. Zixuan was not interested in numbers at all. He heard the teacher explaining the trigonometric number on stage, and his brain had already flown out of the Jiaxian. He unconsciously used a pen to paint on the paper and painted it, and suddenly he heard a light click sound coming from beside him. He was stunned and turned around and saw Bai Xiaoqing's pen dropping to the ground. "Ah, sorry," she said in a low voice, tilting her waist and squishing her pen. Zixia also subconsciously helped, and the hands of the two almost ran into each other. Only then did he realize that Bai Xiaoqing's fingers were so frightening, as if they had just taken them out of the refrigerator. He was shocked, his hands shrank back, and he said nothing. "Thank you." Bai Xiaoqing raised her pen and smiled at him. The smile was still warm, but Zihua felt a little fluttering on his back. He reluctantly emphasized his head, turned around, and began to wonder, what's going on with this person? Why do your hands get so cold? And she seemed to have a very light fragrance on her body, like the smell of an old wooden head. It was not good or strange. After the class, Zhang Weihao came over and said in a low voice, "Zixi, I told you, I just checked something. Your new deskmate is not easy to come." "What's not simple? Are you writing blindly again?" Zixia rolled her eyes, stuffed her book into her bookcase, and prepared to go to the cafeteria to have a meal. "Really? I just saw in the school forum that someone said that Bai Xiaoqing's name seemed to have heard it somewhere before, as if it was related to the old school building. You know, a female student died 50 years ago on the old school building. She said that she was killing herself, but then she became resentful. She would come back to find a substitute every few years." Zhang Wei said with a luxurious look, her eyes flashing with bright light. "Come on, your campus, Sherlock Holmes, is starting to lose weight again." Zixia complained, but she felt a little uncomfortable. He looked back at Bai Xiaoqing, and she was still sitting in her seat, looking down at an old notebook, as if she had not noticed the noise around her at all. "Hey, I'm not talking nonsense. Think about it, she was dressed so reborn, and her skin was as white as a ghost. Maybe." Zhang Weihao wanted to continue, but the quilt was broken. "Okay, don't be scared. They are just transfer students, so how evil you say. Let's go, have a meal." Zixia pulled Zhang Weihao out, but he couldn't completely ignore this guy's words in his heart. After all, Bai Xiaoqing was indeed a little unfavorable, and the cold and strange fragrance always made him feel uneasy. When they arrived at the cafeteria, the two of them found a corner to sit down. Zhang Weihao was still chatting about strange conversations in the campus. Zifu was a little absent-minded. He bit the chopsticks, his brain full of Bai Xiaoqing's white face and Bingqing's fingers. At this moment, a crisp sound interjected in, "What are you talking about? Are you those ghost stories that have no roots?" Zixia raised his head and saw that it was the squad leader Qinmanting. She stood beside her with a dinner plate, her hair drier, her eyebrows were slightly bent, and her eyes were full of disdain. Qinmanting is a top student in the class. She has a good brain and a strong personality. The most annoying thing is these supernatural statements. She always said that all ghosts and gods are all people who scare themselves. "Hey, master class, we are not talking nonsense, we are discussing the background of our new classmates," Zhang Weihao said with a smile, and then said the guesswork again. After Qinmanting finished listening, she snorted coldly, "You guys, don't read horror novels, your brain is damaged. What a resentment stand-in, it's pure nonsense. Bai Xiaoqing is an ordinary student, and her body may be weaker, so she looks a little white. Don't scare yourself all day long. That's what I said, but I always think she's a little weird." Ziki couldn't help but interrupt, his voice low, as if he was talking to himself. Qinmanting glanced at him and slammed her head, "Lin Zixuan, aren't you usually quite rational? Why are you being taken a step back by Zhang Weihao? Sometimes I want to think about these messy things, so it's better to memorize a few more English words. The midterm exam is not far away." After saying that, she left with the dinner plate, leaving Zixuan and Zhang Weihao to talk to each other. "TSK, the squad leader is the squad leader, it's always fun. Zhang Weihao curled his lips and lowered his head to pull the food in the bowl. Zixia didn't say anything, but just lowered his head and took a sip of the soup, and he couldn't think of it as incomplete as Qinmanting. He always felt that Bai Xiaoqing had an indescribable breath, which made him both scared and curious. This feeling was strange, just like when he was walking on the small road in his hometown when he was a child, he could always hear some unrealistic sounds. The afternoon class was very fast, and Zixia almost didn't hear much, and her whole heart was full of the remarks that Bai Xiaoqing and Zhang Weihao said. After school, he wanted to go home directly, but Zhang Weihao and other guys came over again and forced him to go around the old school building behind the campus. "Don't worry, I'm just taking a walk. Although the old school building has been discontinued, I heard that there were still things from that year in it, and I might find a trace." Zhang Weihao looked excited, as if he had discovered something. "Let's lead you, I don't want to be caught on the ground." Zixuan refused, but he still followed. He himself couldn't tell why, but it was an inexplicable attraction to that place. The old school building is located in the most remote corner of the campus. It is a 3-layer old building with vines crawling on the walls, and most of the windows are broken, looking away like a deserted haunted house. It was said that this place used to be a dormitory, but later it was blocked due to some accidents. Now only some old files are still stored in it. Students usually dare not get close, especially after dark. The two stood at the door of the old school building, and the sun was filled with a damp musty smell in the air. Zixia was a little drumming in her heart, but seeing Zhang Weihao's extremely excited look, she was embarrassed to say that she would retreat. "Let's go in and take a look." Zhang Weihao pushed the iron door, and the door squeaked, and the sound was particularly harsh in the empty campus. Zixuan hesitated for a moment and followed him in. It was even more broken than he thought. The corridor was covered with dust, with some broken tables and chairs piled in the corners of the wall, and the musty smell in the air became even more muddy. They took a few steps and suddenly heard a slight response from the building, as if something had fallen to the ground. "What sound?" Zixia stopped and his heartbeat suddenly accelerated. "Maybe it's a mouse, don't be surprised by the monster." Zhang Weihao said it lightly, but there was a bit of tension in his voice. He took out his cell phone, turned on the flashlight, and took a photo at the entrance of the stairs. "Why, should we go up and take a look?" Zixia wanted to refuse, but suddenly her brain flashed past Bai Xiaoqing's white face. He gritted his teeth and clicked, "Okay, go up and take a look. But if you are caught, you will be responsible for explaining it." The two of them climbed up the stairs carefully, and their feet were heard back in the empty corridor, causing numbness to the skin. When they arrived at the second floor, they found that the sound was transmitted from the room inside. The door in that room was half open, and it was pitch black inside and I couldn't see anything clearly. Zhang Weihao swallowed and turned to Zixia. "Are you going to be me first? Aren't you very brave?" "Of course you first," Zixia said unhappily, but his heart was actually very tight. Zhang Weihao curled his lips and walked over with his head. The moment he pushed the door open, a cold wind blew out of the room, carrying a familiar smell like the fragrance of an old wooden head. Zixia was stunned for a moment. Why is this smell exactly the same as the smell on Bai Xiaoqing? The room was empty, with an old table with a yellow notebook on it. Zhang Weihao walked over, picked up the notebook and flipped it out. It was full of handwritten characters, like someone's diary. "Zixi, look at this." Zhang Weihao's voice was trembling. He pointed to the last page of the diary, and wrote a line of words on it. "I won't imply them, I will never." Zixia looked over and felt a little nervous. The words were crooked, as if they were written very excitedly, and the ink was even open for a few moments, as if they were dampened by Rhine water. He was about to say something when he suddenly heard a slight sound of footsteps coming from behind him. The two of them turned around at the same time, but they didn't see anything. But the steps were getting closer and closer, as if someone was walking towards them. Zixia's heartbeat was as fast as if it was about to jump out of his chest. He subconsciously grabbed Zhang Weihao's arm and said in a low voice, Should we leave?" Zhang Wei was so proud that his face turned pale. He stuffed his diary into his bag, pulled the pony and ran out. But when I ran to the stairs, I found that the iron door under the building had closed at some point, and the door still made a click sound, as if something was locking them outside. What is going on? Zhang Weihao's voice was trembling. He pushed the door hard, but the door was still streaked. Zixiao's brain was blank. He turned to look at the corridor as he looked. The rest of the sun had completely disappeared. The darkness was like a big net, slowly covering them. He suddenly remembered Bai Xiaoqing's foggy eyes, and a strong fear surged in his heart. This time, they were afraid that they would really hit something uncensored. Zixiao and Zhang Weihao stood in the corridor of the second floor of the old school building, and a suffocating feeling of pressure was filled with the air. The iron door under the floor was locked for some reason, and the click sound was still ringing in the ears, like a heavy sound hitting the heart. Xiang was completely sunken, and the dim light penetrated through the broken windows, barely illuminating the dust under their feet, but the corridor was as dark as if something was hidden. Why does this door close by yourself? Zhang Weihao's voice was shaking clearly. He patted the iron door hard, and tried to hit it with his shoulder a few times, but the old iron door seemed to have been welded to death, and the pattern was still. He turned to look at Zixiao. The smile on his face had long been gone, his eyes were filled with panic. Zixiao, you said, this is really, that one, right? Don't say it. Zixiao stopped him with a low voice. Although he was so panicked in his heart, he still held his mouth hard. He took out his phone, and the light of the flashlight swept across the surroundings, only illuminating more broken scenes: the spider net at the corners of the wall, the broken glass in the corridor, and the increasingly muscular smell. He took a deep breath and tried to calm himself down. Maybe it was blown by the wind, or someone was malicious. Let's not scare ourselves first and find out if there is any other way. Zhang Wei was a little bit taller, but his face was still as white as paper. He took out the yellow notebook he had just found from his bookcase, and his fingers trembled, as if he wanted to find some trace inside. Zixuan passed by, and with the light of his cell phone, he saw the words in the diary being crooked, as if he was writing very quickly. In addition to the last sentence, I won't remind them, I will never do it. The previous content is mostly daily things, but the later it goes, the more you become, and even a little crazy. This diary looks like a female student. Zhang Weihao said in a low voice, as if he was talking to himself. She mentioned some people, as if they were her classmates, saying that they had been bullying her, and said that she didn't want to live anymore. He swallowed and looked up at Zixiao. You said, this was written by the self-killed female student 50 years ago, right? Zixia didn't say anything, and she felt like she was being pulled hard by something. He suddenly remembered what Zhang Weihao said before in the canteen, that a female student died in the old school building, and later became a resentful person and would come back to find a substitute every few years. Although he has always disbelief of these ghosts and gods, the current strange atmosphere and the resentment revealed in this diary made him unable to completely deny this possibility. Don't think too much, leave this place first and say it. Zixiao suppressed the fear in his heart and pulled Zhang Weihao back. He remembered that there seemed to be a staircase leading to the other side of the second floor. Although it had been sealed a long time ago, he might have found a breakthrough. Their steps were heard back in the empty corridor, and each step seemed to be stepping on the heartbeat, making people's skin numb. But halfway through, Zixia suddenly stopped and his face changed. He heard a very light response, as if someone was humming in a low voice. The sound of the sound continued, and it came from the darkness in the corridor. He turned to Zhang Weihao and found that the guy had also heard it. The expression on his face had changed from panic to pure fear. Have you heard it? Zhang Weihao's voice was almost trembling. His mobile phone flashlight shone unconsciously in the direction of the sound, but the light could not reach that far away, and it was still black. Maybe it's a voice. Zixiao said this, but she didn't believe it at all. He held his cell phone tightly and tried to make his voice sound calm. Don't worry, let's go quickly. But the humming sound became clearer and clearer, as if a girl was singing some old songs in a low voice, and her tunes were slow and sad, which made people feel cold. Zixiao bit her teeth tightly and pulled Zhang Weihao to speed up her pace, but the sound seemed to follow them, and no matter where she went, she could hear the continuous melody. Zijia, I can't do it anymore, my legs are soft. Zhang Weihao's voice was already crying. He grabbed Zijia's arm tightly, as if he was afraid that he would be dragged away by something. Don't worry, it's okay. Zixiao said, gritting his teeth, but his hands were also shaking. He suddenly remembered Bai Xiaoqing's foggy eyes, and the old wooden fragrance on her body. The smell was exactly the same as what he heard when he just entered the room. He felt nervous and couldn't say, it was really her? At this moment, the humming sound came to an abrupt end, replaced by a slight squeak, as if a door was pushed open. Zixiao suddenly turned around and saw the room they had just entered in the corridor. The door was actually open again, and it was pitch black inside, as if they had opened a big mouth, waiting for them to join the romance website. Run! Zixiao could no longer see the hard snatch, and pulled Zhang Weihao into the direction of the back door. But they just ran a few steps and found a big lock hanging on the iron bar in the back door, which was filled with iron lenses and could not be opened at all. Zhang Weihao kicked the foot a few hard, but the door still didn't feel static, but instead hurt his foot. It's over, we're trapped here. Zhang Weihao sat on the ground, his face full of hope. He turned to look at Zixiao, and there was a crying voice in his voice. I said I shouldn't come to this ghost place. You have to follow me. Now, I'm really hitting a ghost. Close your mouth. Zixiao roared in a low voice, and his brain flew quickly. He knew that now was not a time to complain to each other, and he had to find a way to take it off. He glanced around his eyes and found a broken window next to the rear door. The glass had long been broken, leaving only a circle of pointed edges. Zhang Weihao, get up, let's go out of the window. Zixuan pointed to the window, with an unquestionable determination in the sound. Are you crazy? This is the second floor. You will have to be killed even if you jump down. Zhang Weihao widened his eyes, his face full of regret. Don't you jump, stay here and wait to be taken away by the thing? Zixiao said coldly, then removed her coat, wrapped it in her hand, and tried to clean the broken glass on the window frame. His hand was slapped with a few small holes and blood was poured out, but he gritted his teeth and said nothing, but he just watched Lu Qing out. Zhang Weihao looked at his side, and finally gritted his teeth and stood up. Okay, I'll hear you. At worst, you can throw your legs off, which is better than being caught by a ghost. The two of them paid a lot of money before climbing onto the windowsill. Zixiao looked down and found that there was indeed a grassy field below. Although the height was a bit scary, he should not be killed by falling. He took a deep breath and turned to Zhang Weihao. I'll jump first, you follow me. After saying that, he closed his eyes, bit his teeth and jumped down. The moment he landed, the dramatic shock made him feel soft on his knees, and he almost fell to his dog to eat shit, but at least he stood firm. He raised his head and shouted, get down quickly, it's okay. Zhang Weihao hesitated for a moment, and his eyes stuttered. He was heavier than his son, and when he landed on the ground, he fell down his butt, and he was so painful that he was humming, but at least he didn't suffer any serious injuries. The two of them looked at each other and finally relaxed their voices. They rushed away from the old school building without daring to go back. After running out of the campus, the two of them found a convenience store on the way to sit down, gasping for a long time, and couldn't speak. Zhang Weihao took out his diary, his hands were still shaking, and he was afraid of him. This matter, this is too evil. He hummed and closed the door itself. I swear that I won't go to the old school building anymore. Zixia didn't say anything, just lowered his head and looked at the wound on his hand, and his heart was in a mess. He knew that today's incident could not be explained by spook or malice drama. The cold feeling, the familiar fragrance made him think of Bai Xiaoqing. He suddenly had a straightforward feeling all of this might really have something to do with her. Should we tell others? Zhang Weihao asked in a low voice, his eyes full of hesitation. Tell me, who did you tell me? I heard ghosts singing in the middle of the night. Do you think anyone would believe me? Zixuan smiled bitterly and shook his head. Don't say it first. Let me put it on your blog this day first, and go to school tomorrow and then see what the situation is. Zhang Wei was very proud of his head, although he was unwilling to do so, but he had no other choice. The two of them went home, and Zixiao lay on the bed, turning around and unable to sleep, and her heart was full of humming sounds in the old school building and the words on the diary. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that Bai Xiaoqing's appearance was definitely not a coincidence. The next morning, Zixiao came to the classroom with 2 dark circles on his head and found that Bai Xiaoqing was already sitting in her seat, looking down at an old notebook. Her long hair covered half of her face, as if she had not noticed the people around her at all. He hesitated for a moment, walked over and said lightly, "Good morning." Bai Xiaoqing raised her head and smiled at him. The smile was still warm and sparse. "Go ahead, Lin Zixuan." Zixiao felt nervous, and she smiled hard and sat in her seat. He secretly glanced at the White Xiaoqing's notebook and found that the cover of the book was a bit similar to the one I found in the old school building last night. They were both very old cowhide covers, and the corners were a little worn. His heart beats faster and he tried to ask, "Xiqing, where did your notebook come from? It looks quite old." Bai Xiaoqing was stunned for a moment, looked down at the notebook in her hand, and said lightly, "This is something from my house," with a bit of thought. "Are you interested in this?" No, I just asked casually." Zixiao hurriedly held his hands, and he felt even more confused. He was about to say something else, but Zhang Weihao walked in. His face was still a little pale. When he saw Zixiao, he winked and signaled him to go outside to speak. The two walked to the corridor and Zhang Weihao said in a low voice, "Zixiao, I went back last night and read the diary again, and found that the last few pages mentioned a name, Bai Xiaoqing. You said, will this be?" "Don't guess." Zixiao interrupted him, but his heart was filled with shock waves. If Bai Xiaoqing in the diary is really their deskmate, then who is she? Or, she is not a human at all? We have to find someone to help, otherwise I really can't stand this. Zhang Weihao looked bitter, as if he would collapse at any time. Zixiao thought about it and said, "Okay, look for Qinmanting. Although she doesn't believe in ghosts and gods, her brain is very useful, and she may help us clarify our thoughts." While having lunch, the two of them pulled Qinmanting to the corner of the cafeteria and told them all about what happened last night. After Qinmanting finished listening, her eyebrows were so stunning that she could stumble and say, "Did you get your brains in the water?" She ran to the old school building in the middle of the night and violated the school rules. She also wrote this story to scare people? What diary and name are probably because you misread it or it is just a coincidence. The chief, I'm really not an editor. If you don't believe it, take a look at this diary for yourself. Zhang Weihao took out the yellow notebook from his bookcase and pushed it to Qinmanting. Qinmanting flipped through the diary and glanced a few times. Her face changed slightly, but she quickly returned to peace. This word is indeed very old, but it cannot be proved. Bai Xiaoqing's name may be just the same name and surname. Don't be afraid of yourself. I suggest you hand this book over to the teacher, saying it may be a school file and it is not a trivial matter to take it away privately. Talk to the teacher? That would reveal our visit to the old school building? Zhang Weihao looked reluctant and hurriedly took the diary back. Zixiao didn't say anything, and he thought Qinmanting's words were reasonable, but he also knew that this matter was not that simple. He said in a low voice, "Second leader, why don't you do that? Let's check Bai Xiaoqing's background again to see what she is coming. If there is really a problem, we will decide what to do." Qinmanting sighed, as if she had no choice but to deal with them. "Okay, but I'll say it first, I don't believe in any ghosts or gods. If you find out it in the end, it's just a mistake, you have to apologize to me and hand over your diary." "Trade." Zhang Weihao Lima replied, as if he had caught a life-saving straw. In the next few days, the three of them began to secretly investigate Bai Xiaoqing's background. Zhang Weihao was responsible for hearing news in the school forum and old alumni groups. Qinmanting used her rights to search the school's file records, while Zixiao tried to contact Bai Xiaoqing more and observe her behavior. But the more they checked, the more they felt unfavorable they felt. Zhang Weihao discovered that some old alumni mentioned the name Bai Xiaoqing in the school forum, saying that he was a student 50 years ago. he had good achievements but was withdrawn. Later, he killed himself in the old school building. Qinmanting found an old student name in the file room, which contained Bai Xiaoqing's name. Although the photo was blurry, the white face and long hair were almost exactly the same as their deskmate. At Zixuan, he found that although Bai Xiaoqing didn't say much, her expression would become very strange every time she mentioned the old school building or past events, as if she was hiding something secret. What's even more strange is that once he accidentally touched Bai Xiaoqing's hand, and the icy temperature even made his palms have goosebumps. A few days later, the three of them gathered in the corner of the cafeteria again, and their faces were not very good-looking. Qinmanting broke the silence and said in a low voice, "Although I still think this matter is reasonable, I have to admit that these threads are really too coincidental. Bai Xiaoqing may be really a problem. Then what should we do next? I can't just ask her, 'Hey, are you a ghost, right?'" Zhang Weihao looked bitterly, his voice full of helplessness. Zixuan was silent for a while and raised his head. "I think the answer is still in the old school building. That diary may just be the beginning, there must be another thread in it. We have to go there and figure out all of this." "Are you crazy? I almost died last time, so why don't you go?" Zhang Weihao's eyes widened, his face full of resistance. Qinmanting also said, "Lin Zixuan, this is too dangerous. What happens repeatedly? Who is responsible? But if we don't figure it out, can we feel at ease?" Zixuan's voice was low and calm. He looked at the two people, with a rare look in his eyes. "I always think that Bai Xiaoqing is not trying to harm others. She may need our help." Qinmanting and Zhang Weihao looked at each other. Although they were unwilling to do so, they finally got to the point. So the three of them agreed to go to the old school building to find out on the weekend night. This time, they were more prepared, brought flashlights, snails, and even found an iron crowbar to prevent it. On weekend nights, the campus was quiet and the old school building looked even more lush under the moonlight. The three of them stood in front of the iron gate, their hearts were a little pounding, but who did not retreat? They took a deep breath, pushed open the iron door, and stepped into the darkness. The moonlight came in from the cracked windows, covering the corridors of the old school building with a cold silver light. Lin Zi held the flashlight tightly in his hand, and the beam of light swayed in the dark, illuminating the dusty floor under his feet. Zhang Weihao followed him, holding an iron crowbar in his hand, and his breathing was as thick as a wind box. Qinmanting walked in the end, and although her face still had that cold expression, her fingers holding the phone were slightly white, and she obviously did not look as calm as she looked on the surface. "Zixi, are you sure we must come to this ghost place again?" Zhang Weihao muttered in a low voice, and the sound was filled with regret. He glanced around him, the broken walls and the broken tables and chairs piled up in the corners made him feel uncomfortable. "I almost died last time. If something happens again this time, I will really not be alive. Don't miss it, it's all here." Zixuan replied in a low voice. Although his heart was a little swaying, he knew that if he didn't figure it out, who wouldn't be at ease? He looked back at Qinmanting and asked in a low voice, "Captain, do you still remember the name found in the file room? It said that Bai Xiaoqing was a student 50 years ago and later killed herself on this building. If the diary was really hers, there would definitely be more traces hidden here." Qinmanting pointed at her head and her eyebrows were slightly slight. "I still think this is reasonable, but, well, let's find the certificate first before telling it. I remember the file mentioned that the accident that happened in the room in the innermost part of the third floor, which might be an old classroom. Let's go there and take a look." The three of them looked at each other, gritted their teeth, and began to walk towards the entrance of the stairs. The sound of the footsteps reverberated in the empty corridor, and each step seemed to be stepping on the heartbeat, making people's skin numb. The air in the old school building was still so moist and muddy, mixed with a strange smell that could not be said, making Zixuan think of the old wooden fragrance on Bai Xiaoqing's body. His heart tightened, and his hand shook the flashlight even harder. After going to the third floor, the corridor was even worse than the second floor. The walls were covered with falling paint, and several doors were half open, as if something would come out from there at any time. Zhang Weihao couldn't help but shrink his neck and said in a low voice, "Why is the more you look at this place, the more evil you become? Do you hear any sound? Don't scare yourself." Qinmanting cut him coldly, but her eyes were also a little flashy, obviously not as rude as she said. Zixuan didn't say anything, but just walked silently towards the room inside. The light of the flashlight swept across every door, trying to capture any uneven silence. Finally, they arrived at the old classroom at the deepest part of the third floor. The door is woody and has long been extremely decayed. There is a sign of raw lens hanging on the door frame, and you can probably see the word Class 3 to 5. Zixuan took a deep breath and reached out to push the door open. The door axle made a harsh squeak sound, which made the three of them unable to help but beat the cold kid. The room was empty, only a few old tables and chairs piled in the corners. The glass of the window had long been broken, and the moonlight came in from the empty window frames, illuminating the thick gray on the floor. There was a more mushy smell in the air, and a familiar fragrance filled it. It was the smell on Bai Xiaoqing's body. This place is so strange. Zhang Weihao swallowed, his voice trembling. He knocked on the floor with an iron crowbar, as if trying to explore something, but nothing was discovered except for the empty reverberation. "Don't be upset, let's look for any traces," Qinmanting said in a low voice, and then began to search for the broken tables and chairs in the corner. At the end of the subplate, I walked to an old bookbinder next to the window, filled with yellow paper and broken books. He carefully flipped through several books and found that most of them were old textbooks, but at the bottom, he found a small iron box with a glitter on the surface, but it could still be opened. "Captain Weihao, come and have a look," Zixuan shouted in a low voice, and the two of them rushed over. He carefully opened the iron box, and there were a faded blue silk strap, and a few yellow photos. The photo shows a girl wearing an old school uniform with a long hair shawl. Her smile is warm and shy. Although the photo is a bit blurry, that face clearly means Bai Xiaoqing. This is really her." Zhang Weihao's voice changed, and his fingers trembled at the photo. "Zixi, I didn't look wrong, right? This is our deskmate." Qinmanting's face also became solemn. She picked up the photo for details and said in a low voice, "This photo has been at least for several decades. But her appearance is exactly the same as Bai Xiaoqing now. This cannot be a coincidence." Zixuan didn't say anything, and she felt like she was being grabbed by something. He picked up the blue silk strap, and the moment his fingers touched him, a cold chill ran through his fingertips. Some blurry pictures suddenly flashed in his brain. A girl stood by the window, flowing all over, and said something in her mouth, then turned her body. He suddenly came back to his senses, shook his hand, and fell to the ground. "What's wrong with you?" Qinmanting asked with a brow when she noticed his strangeness. It's okay." Zixuan shook his head, and cold sweat broke out on the head. He couldn't explain the feeling just now, as if something had been diamonded into his brain, and he could see a memory that was not his own. He tilted his waist and raised his strap and said in a low voice, "This thing may have something to do with Bai Xiaoqing. We have to figure out who she is, or what she is." At this moment, the temperature in the room suddenly dropped a little, and a cold wind inexplicably blew in from the window, causing the three of them to be fucked. Zhang Wei looked around with great mercy, his voice filled with fear. "Do you think this place suddenly becomes cold? Don't say it's because the weather may have changed." Qinmanting's mouth was hard, but there was a flash of anxiety in her eyes. Zixuan didn't say anything, but just held the strap in his hand tightly, and a strong premonition surged in his heart. They were very close to the truth, but at the same time, they were also closer to the danger. Suddenly, a light click sounded from the corner of the room, as if something had been trampled. The three of them turned around at the same time, but they didn't see anything. But then, a low humming sound came from the door, making Z slow and sad, which was the sound that Z and Zhang Weihao heard last time. "It's this sound again." Zhang Weihao's face turned pale in an instant. He subconsciously retreated behind Zixuan, and even the iron crowbar was unable to hold it. Cold and quiet. Qinmanting stopped crying, but her voice also shook. She took out her cell phone, turned on the flashlight and shone towards the door, but there was no one in the light, and only the humming sound became clearer and clearer, as if someone was walking towards them. Zixiao's heartbeat was as fast as if it was about to jump out of his chest, and he suddenly remembered the sentence in his diary, "I won't remind them, I will never." He gritted his teeth and said in a low voice, "Whatever it is, we can't sit and wait. Wei Hao, please keep your door, the squad leader, help me find out if there's any other thread. I think this humming, may be to tell us something. Are you crazy? Are you still looking for a thread at this time?" Zhang Wei looked at Zixiao with great confidence, but looking at Zixiao's determined look, he still gritted his teeth and stood at the door, with an iron crowbar on his chest, as if he was trying to hurt himself. Qinmanting didn't say anything, but just quickly looked through other corners in the room. Zixiao squatted down, carefully checked the dust on the floor, and tried to find any unusual traces. At this moment, the humming suddenly stopped, replaced by a light voice, as if it was coming from a very far place, or as if it was close to the ears. "Zijia." A familiar voice sounded softly, carrying a warmth and a slight sadness. Zixiao raised her head suddenly and found that Bai Xiaoqing was standing at the door at some point, wearing the ancient white dress, long hair shawl, and her skin was almost transparent. Her eyes were still covered with a fog, and there was a bit more sad than usual. How did you come?" Zixiao's voice was trembling. He took a step back subconsciously, and the strap in his hand was held tighter. Zhang Weihao was so scared that he almost screamed when he saw Bai Xiaoqing, and the iron crowbar dropped to the ground with a clang. Qinmanting was also stunned. The light from the mobile phone flashlight shone directly on Bai Xiaoqing, but her figure seemed a little blurry, as if it would disappear at any time. "Don't be afraid, I won't hurt you," Bai Xiaoqing said lightly. The sound was still so light, as if it was transmitted from a very far place. She walked into the room slowly, her feet were very light, and she made almost no sound. Her eyes fell on the strap in Zixiao's hand, and a complex emotion flashed through her eyes. "You found my stuff. Your thing?" Zixiao felt nervous, trying to make his voice sound calmer. "Xiqing, who are you? Why did your name appear in the file 50 years ago? This strip, and the photos, are all yours, right?" Bai Xiaoqing was silent for a while, and then he said lightly, "Yes, that's my thing, it's my past. My name is Bai Xiaoqing. 50 years ago, I was a student at this school. I died in this classroom." Her words were like a heavy note, hitting the hearts of the three of them hard. Zhang Weihao sat directly on the ground, muttering in his mouth, it's really a ghost." Although Qinmanting didn't say anything, her face was also scary and her phone almost fell to the ground. Zixiao took a deep breath, pressed down on the fear in his heart, and continued to ask, "Then why did you appear on us? Why do you want to be our deskmate? Are you looking for a substitute?" Bai Xiaoqing shook her head, her eyes filled with sadness. "No, I have never thought of harming anyone. I was trapped in this school and could not leave or resolve it. I became your deskmate because I felt that you had a special atmosphere, like someone who could help me. I have been trying to protect you from her injuries." "She? Who is her?" Zixiao was stunned, and a bad feeling surged in his heart. Bai Xiaoqing's eyes became even more dim. She said in a low voice, "It's another soul, a soul that is stronger than me and more full of resentment. She was one of the people who killed me that year. After she died, she turned into a resentment, but her resentment was too heavy and she was completely out of control. Every few years, she would come back to find a new substitute. And I kept trying to stop her." Her words made the three of them even more shocked. Qinmanting finally couldn't help but open her mouth, and her voice was a little sad. "Are you saying that there are two ghosts in this school? One is you, and the other is the resentment that killed you?" Bai Xiaoqing point, "Yes. Her resentment comes from the truth of that year I was not killing myself, but framed by her and several classmates. They were jealous of my achievements and joined forces to bully me. Finally, in this classroom, she pushed me down the window." Her voice became more and more low, as if he was in a painful memory. "After I died, they hid the truth and said that I was killing myself. but my grudges were not strong and I could not report them, so I could only be trapped here. And she, later died, but because of the guilt and fear in her heart, she became a more terrifying existence. Zixia heard it, and his heart seemed to be blocked by something. He suddenly remembered the words in his diary, and the pictures he saw when he just touched the strap. He asked in a low voice, "Then what can we do? How can we help you, and stop her?" Bai Xiaoqing raised her head, and a flash of hope appeared in her eyes. "You have found my belt and photo. This is where my thoughts lie. As long as you can complete a ceremony and send my thoughts away, I can leave this school." And her resentment comes from the truth of that year. As long as you can reveal the truth and let the world know her sins, her resentment will dissipate. Ship? Let's make the truth public. Zhang Weihao was stunned, his voice filled with resistance. Why is this so mysterious? We are just ordinary students, so what kind of things are there? Chen Manting thought for a while and said in a low voice, "It is possible to disclose the truth. There's also a record of that year in the school file room. If you can find the certificate, you will understand that Xiaoqing is not killing herself, but being harmed, and you may be able to make this happen in the world. As for the ceremony, Xiaoqing, can you tell us what to do?" Bai Xiaoqing was slightly clear and his voice was soft. "The ritual is very simple. You need to light a small bunch of dry grass by the window of this classroom, use my silk belt to scatter it, and then burn it in the moonlight. As it burns, read out my name and tell me that I can leave. In this way, my thoughts will be released." It doesn't seem difficult." Zhang Weihao slapped his head. Although he was still scared, he could not refuse when he looked at Bai Xiaoqing's sad eyes. Zixiao gritted his teeth and pointed out, "Okay, let's try it. But you have to guarantee that the resentment will not appear at this time." Bai Xiaoqing shook her head, with a helpless look in her eyes. "I can't guarantee. She has sensed your existence and may come any time. But I will do my best to protect you." This made the three of them feel nervous, but now they have no way out. Chen Manting took out a small bag of dry grass leaves from her bookcase. This was what she had prepared for her before for her experiment, but she didn't expect it to be put on the market. Zixiao picked up the strap, carefully rolled it on the bunch of grass, then walked to the window, and lit the bunch of grass with the moonlight. The flames ignited, making a slight crackling sound, and the silk slowly turned into ash in the flames. Zixiao took a deep breath and said in a low voice, "Bai Xiaoqing, you can leave now. Your pain is over. Now, go to where you should go." His voice fell, and a warm wind blew in from the window, and Bai Xiaoqing's figure began to become more transparent. She smiled at the three of them, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, I can finally get rid of it." But at this moment, a sharp roar came from the corridor as if full of anger and resentment. The temperature in the room instantly dropped to the ice point, and the door was suddenly closed by an invisible force, making a huge bang sound. Bai Xiaoqing's face changed and she said in a low voice, "She is here, hurry up, hide." The three of them did not react yet, and a black shadow penetrated from the door, gradually condensing into a twisted body. It was a woman in a ragged school uniform, with a dark face and a resentful light in her eyes. "Zizhu, run!" Zhang Weihao shouted, lifted the iron crowbar on the ground and smashed it towards the shadow, but the iron rod penetrated the shadow directly, as if hitting the air. The black shadow sneered, reached out and grabbed Zhang Weihao, and was about to touch his neck. "Stop!" Bai Xiaoqing suddenly rushed over and used her body to block the black shadow. The moment her figure touched the black shadow, she emitted a dazzling white light, making the whole room light up. The black shadow let out a painful roar and retreated temporarily, but Bai Xiaoqing's figure became more transparent, as if it would disappear at any time. "Xiaoqing!" Zixiao shouted, and a feeling of indescribable sorrow surged in his heart. He knew that Bai Xiaoqing was protecting them with her final strength. "Go quickly, to the file room and find the truth." Bai Xiaoqing's voice became weaker and weaker, but her eyes were still calm. Only by revealing the truth can she completely dispel her resentment. Zixiao bit his teeth and said, "Okay, we will definitely do it." He pulled Zhang Weihao and Chen Manting, took advantage of the gap between Bai Xiaoqing and dragged the shadows, and ran out of the room and down the building. They ran all the way and finally ran out of the old school building. The campus under the moonlight looked particularly quiet, but they knew that the battle was not over yet. Chen Manting gasped and said in a low voice, "The file room is in the bishop's building. We have to pass by all night and find out the records of that year. Yes, no matter how difficult it is, we have to finish this for Xiaoqing." Zixiao's voice was low and calm. He looked at the old school building far away and silently promised in his heart that no matter how terrible the resentment was, they would reveal the truth, so that Bai Xiaoqing could truly solve it, and that this school would no longer be covered by curses.